Q&A. First off, I want to thank the Ethereum, Chainlink, and blockchain community for joining us, and especially Hudson here, who took time out of his very busy schedule to share some of his insights with us. The overall goal of this Q&A or kind of AMA is a little bit different, where we're really focusing on kind of what Hudson does for Ethereum, some advice he has for people looking to kind of join the community and enter the space, some information about what Ethereum's really focused on developing, and kind of really just sort of an informational piece for everybody here. So not really focused on Chainlink, this one really at all. This one's really focused on kind of getting an Ethereum update. Obviously, you know, Chainlink's on the Ethereum platform, so our community members are very interested in how things are going on, and sometimes it's hard to get quality information from the source, and there's obviously a lot of viewpoints out there on crypto Twitter. So that's really what the focus of this one is. If you did have a question that I wasn't able to address, feel free to reach out on our social channels. I'll do my best to get that answered for you, and then we'll add a bunch of links in the description as well if you want to kind of deep dive into anything here that we discuss. So kind of just to get things kicked off, I just wanted to say, and I've never really shared this with Hudson before, but as I was kind of entering this space a couple of years ago, Hudson was definitely one of sort of the role models I had for how you interact with the community, how you behave, how you need to be in the space, how you need to deliver information, how you need to act. And basically when I kind of first started, one of my goals was, if I can get like this, if I can act like this, if I can behave like this consistently, I have a chance to be successful. So Hudson's been in the space for a long time, and he, along with a lot of other people, are a big reason why I'm involved, and ultimately why I'm involved with Chainlink. So I just want to say personally, thank you for everything that you've done over the past several years. Thank you for the things that you keep doing, and I'm super excited to have you on board.
Thank you so much for the kind words. And I have a really quick anecdote, because I've been an advisor with Chainlink since, I don't even know, maybe 2017 or so, maybe 2016. And Sergey came out to me and he was like, Hudson, all right, we're growing and we need something. We have all these developers, but we need to build a community. How do we do that? And I said, get someone who's on the ball, who can interact with the community, you know, who can just like really connect with people. And I'm really happy they found you, Rory, because I think you're doing a great job of that. And I'm really happy that Sergey took my advice, because the Chainlink community has grown so much over the past few years. It's been really, really cool.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate the kind words, and strive to do better every day. And I've got a lot of personal growth to do, but I'm excited to have the opportunity to do it with this great community. So thank you. Perfect. So kind of question number one, would you mind maybe a brief introduction of yourself and maybe some background? How did you really get started in blockchain? How did you really get started in Ethereum? And maybe what was your journey? How did you get here?
Sure. So I'm Hudson Jameson, and where did I get my start? So I'd say my start was back in 2011. I was in college, and I don't know how I discovered it. I think I was just on a forum somewhere, and I discovered Bitcoin, and it immediately intrigued me because I was going through a heavy libertarian phase at that point. And I was like, oh, cool, uncensorable money, you know, something that's not the Federal Reserve. And so I immediately got 3 of my computers to start mining Bitcoin with CPUs, and spun that all up. And that was a lot of fun, because I was there for a computer science degree. So this was kind of also in line with my computer science background. I mined about half a Bitcoin and then kind of dropped off for a little bit after the first Mt. Gox hack. I didn't lose anything, but it was just kind of like, oh, this is unsafe. Got back into it off and on for a few years, and then really dove into it in 2013 again, doing some projects in college for it. And additionally, you know, getting more Bitcoin buying and selling, getting involved in other cryptocurrencies throughout 2014. And I think into 2015, I worked with Darkcoin, which is now called Dash. And that was another group that I thought was a really neat community. I got more deeply involved in there than I did in Bitcoin for sure. And then I read the Ethereum white paper one day, and it was like instantly clicked. It was like, oh, take this, you know, uncensorable programmable money and make it into programs that, you know, can't be tainted with. So I like bought into the crowd sale, and I kind of followed it for a bit. I joined a bank called USAA in 2014, and I got involved in some internal hackathons there, working on Ethereum, and eventually I bugged everyone about blockchain enough that I became the blockchain lead developer between 2015 and 2016 at the bank. I went to DevCon 1 at the end of 2015, just completely obsessed with Ethereum at that point. I went there and it was in London. It's a DevCon's the big Ethereum conference that happens every year for those who don't know. And I went there and I saw like Vitalik and Vlad Zamfir and Alex Vandesand and just all these people that are like my idols. And I was like, oh my gosh, I get to see them in person. And just talked to a lot of people and got really inspired. And I met the executive director of the Ethereum Foundation, who offered me a job a few months later because I was busting my butt volunteering for DevCon 1. And I just left USAA in the summer of 2016. And initially I was doing stuff with DevOps, like server setups and stuff, and DevCon planning. And that grew into a role of security at the Ethereum Foundation, and also working with the EIPs, which is the Ethereum Improvement Proposals specifications for Ethereum, and working with the core developers at the core developer meetings. I've been doing those since 2016, like the end of 2016, I believe, all the way up until now. We have it every 2 weeks. And yeah, since then, I've also been really active in the community, been a Reddit moderator, just kind of trying to get people on board to Ethereum in general. So that's my story. And I think you had another part of that question, maybe.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I mean, I think you really touched on most of it. I guess that kind of really leads into, you did explain a bit of your role, but how would you personally define your role? Like, what does your day kind of look like?
So it really varies. So I would say that I'm a developer and community liaison if I had to like put my role into like a few words. But I do a bit more than that because I help with, yeah, like I said, DevOps and security. Day to day, I'm basically on like 60 chat rooms, monitoring some of them. I have a lot of them muted, but I'm sure, Rory, you know what I'm talking about, just being on all
Yes.
these chat rooms. And uh, I get requests from people like, hey, you know, I'm on Salesforce. Can you give me this API key to set up this? Or, hey, I'm new to the foundation. Can I get an email set up? And I set up their email, things of that nature. And that's kind of my DevOps role. If there's ever any kind of security stuff that happens on the network, I don't actually fix it because I'm a terrible developer. I'm a terrible software coder. And so I don't fix it myself, but I know enough from my CS background that I can jump in and kind of organize the people who can fix it. So every once in a while there's an emergency and I jump in on that. Otherwise, I have a few people who I work with who are in the community department at the Ethereum Foundation. So we have meetings every week. I advise certain people. It really varies day to day. I'm also working a lot with the EEA currently, which is the Ethereum Enterprise Alliance, and working on their baseline protocol, which I know Chainlink is also involved in, and also the main networking group, which is another EEA initiative. And I should correct myself, baseline's not EEA, but like a lot of EEA people are working on baseline. So it makes it really nice to get people with experience developing on the code base. So day to day, EEA, DevOps, community security, posting on Twitter. That's about it.
All right. Well, I guess I should have really asked you what you don't do, but yeah, thank you for that. I think that's always been one of the things that's interesting to me, is that I see you doing so many kind of different things. So I've always been interested to know, what your role is, but I appreciate you kind of describing everything and why people probably see you around as much as they do.
Sure.
Excellent. So that being said, this is a kind of a question coming from me really personally, but how do you define success in your current role? So if you're, I'm successful, kind of what are your goals, or how do you know when, you're doing things at the level that you want to do them at?
You know, when I was first coming on to Ethereum, I would say that getting people to know about it and growing myself and my knowledge of it were big goals, because I was just kind of new, getting to know people. now that I know a lot of people, I'm actually floundering a little bit and talking to people at my work because like I haven't lost direction necessarily, but like it's not as clear. And part of that is like I don't have as much mentorship as I used to. So right now, just to be honest, it's kind of up in the air a little bit motivation wise and things like that. I'm definitely motivated by the community and how awesome they are. And that's kind of the default answer that a lot of people are going to say. But like on a personal level, it's a little hard right now for me to see where I go next because everything just kind of turned out great and I kind of got what I wanted as far as life goals go. So yeah.
Well, that's a great problem to have. I
Yeah,
suppose
it
so.
really is.
But I've always found that next thing or that next motivation usually finds a way of working itself into your life at the appropriate time. So just keep working hard, and things usually find a way of working themselves out, I've found.
And I guess I totally forgot. Like, I know we're talking about blockchain a lot, but separating work life and home life has been something that I've really been working on the past few years and has been a motivation because I have a spouse and 3 cats who we treat like children and a friend group IRL that I don't always talk about Ethereum to. So that's another motivation.
Awesome. Yeah, I've definitely struggled with that in the past as kind of things are growing quickly. I think it's very easy I can commit 14 hours a day, I can commit 16 hours a day, but at the same time, you've got to keep working and building on yourself as well. And I think there's a lot of benefits to that.
Yep, absolutely.
Excellent. So moving on to kind of Ethereum development a little bit, would you mind maybe sharing a broad outlook for what is being worked on now, or what is kind of the near term kind of goals for Ethereum development wise?
Yeah. So I'll separate this into base layer and like higher level layers like dApps and layer 2. At the base layer, there's a lot of client optimization. So what I mean by that is when you're running a Geth node, when you're running a Open Ethereum or Nethermind node, you can sync the chain faster, it's more reliable, things like that. That's the Ethereum 1.0 side. And then the next level is Ethereum 1x. And what that is it's looking at research topics to make both Ethereum 1.0 and 2.0 faster, better to use, cutting edge research. And then like stateless Ethereum, if you want to look that up. And then Ethereum 2.0 is the most hyped one, where we got the next iteration of Ethereum where there's sharding and staking and different economic principles and easier to use and or cheaper and easier to use contracts and just more extensibility. So that's kind of at the core layers. On the second layer, like layer 2, dApp layer and stuff, we have optimistic rollups, which is this stupid complicated thing where you can kind of combine stuff off chain and have some requirements that that the transactions go through appropriately without having to touch the mainnet that much. So it's a lot cheaper to handle. You can scale up very quickly, even if you're using 1.0 today. And so there's a lot of progress there. And then I'm not seeing enough of this, but I'm hoping for a lot more usability, UI, UX improvements. We're still kind of trapped in MetaMask and like having to run our own nodes and relying on Infura. So I'm hoping that with time comes more people being onboarded and more people looking for solutions like that. And I mentioned this the other day on Twitter. I want more people who aren't necessarily technical to step up, like I've seen in the Chainlink community do, but do it for Ethereum and other smaller Ethereum projects as a whole, so people understand you can use Ethereum today. You see all these projects using it, including Chainlink. I mean, it's ready today.
Yeah, I think that's a common problem. Is obviously everyone always, this is a very future leaning I think cryptography and blockchain is a very forward looking group, but I don't think we take a lot of time sometimes to reflect on everything that is possible right now. The discussion tends to be, well, in a year or 6 months, and that's a great conversation, but the reality is, I mean, if even just focus, I'm just going to focus on DeFi, but
Yeah.
I see a new project a day, every 2 days, that's doing something interesting and different that's live on Ethereum now. And I think that's probably a narrative that does get lost from time to time.
Oh yeah.
Awesome. You mentioned a little bit about EIP, and I think a lot of people don't have a great understanding of that. So would you mind maybe just a very basic description of I have an idea for something maybe coding wise or feature wise or something of that nature. I want to get Ethereum. What's the process of what does that process look like?
Sure. So Ethereum prides itself on being very open and accepting of different contributions. And the EIP process is how to take those contributions and those ideas at a technical level and include them in Ethereum. So EIP stands for Ethereum Improvement Proposals. And what you do is if you have an idea for an improvement, like I want to make a new token standard, or I want to make like a way for all of these wallet vaults to interact with each other and like transfer coins from one vault to another vault. I can write that up, put the specification, the abstract, the motivation, the security considerations, all in this markdown file in GitHub. And then it goes from just an idea to being a draft. And then from a draft, you have to develop consensus around the idea, get people like maybe a big vendor like Gnosis or other places that produce vaults, and have them sign on to the idea, use that standard. And if enough people are using that standard, it goes from draft to accepted. So that's actually a subset of EIPs called ERCs, which are like standards that the community brings up. There's also core EIPs, and core EIPs are like really low level client network protocol research level ideas and technical specifications that are used to develop and improve the Ethereum protocol at a base level.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you for that description. I know a lot of people see it on Twitter. I'm sure they've wonder exactly what that process looks like. And I know it takes time, but I think sometimes maybe that's a good thing. I know there's a lot of discussion. Some EIPs are very controversial. Some, seem to be pretty readily accepted. So it's always interesting to follow that conversation. And those conversations seem like one day it's one way, the next day it's the other. But sounds like the overall idea is that you're getting people to agree that this is a good idea. And then if enough people agree, that idea can basically be moved forward.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Just getting the forming consensus and deciding on consensus is the hard part. So that's where the challenge lies.
All right, excellent. You mentioned this a little bit earlier, but obviously we have a wide range of people in the Chainlink community and obviously in the Ethereum community. If I'm, Joe Blow, and maybe I just love blockchain, but I'm not a developer, how would you recommend they get started in supporting the Ethereum community or supporting really any community? What's some kind of basic advice you could say? This is how you can get involved today.
So there's multiple ways depending on what your skill set is. I'd say at a general level, like what everyone can do is speak up more on Reddit and Twitter and chat channels. A lot of people are lurkers. I would say that that's okay to do, but you really contribute to the conversation and ideas if you speak up, and it's exciting and it gets people thinking. And then the people who are technical can look at that idea and implement it if it's a fair idea or something that's going to really help things. So just speak up, get involved in that way. I would also say participating in things like surveys and providing feedback to developers. There's not enough feedback given to a lot of these dApps. You go in there and the UI and UX is just terrible. And what you need to do is just send an email, be like, hey, here's some ideas I have. I'd love to use your app, but here's some shortcomings. And people really like that feedback. There's also stuff you can do in making up guides on how to use stuff. Like anyone can use a screen recorder pretty much if you use a laptop, and you can say like walkthroughs of like, here's how I set up this thing that was like a technical thing, but I didn't have to do any coding to set it up. And post that on YouTube and get more coverage that way, and just talk to people about the technology if they're interested.
Yeah, it sounds a lot like evangelism essentially, or
Yeah.
basically where you're saying, I think this is a great idea. I'm going to introduce my friends, my neighbors, meetups. I think one of the things we've tried to focus on at Chainlink, which I think Bitcoin and Ethereum did a great job of, was just that local meetup of where 15 people getting together. I had a good friend of mine that showed me an Ethereum meetup with probably 4 to 5 of the biggest names in Ethereum. But to him at the time, it was a group of guys, like 12 guys that met in Denver. that just talked about Ethereum. And then all of a sudden, like he showed me the picture of that group, and there's 5 people right now. If I was to show you that picture, you'd be like, oh, so-and-so was there, so-and-so was there. But it starts there. And I think a lot of people don't understand it can start that small, 5 people at a cafe. And, you know, I really kind of love that sort of initial grassroots kind of Ethereum where it was just a bunch of people getting together, talking about it, getting excited. And then eventually it's led to this, but I still think there's a lot of room for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I did an Ethereum meetup where I live back in 2015, and it only had a handful of people, but a lot of those people now have moved on to really big careers in blockchain. So it can definitely be a difference maker.
Awesome. Perfect. What excites you most about the future? And this doesn't have to be Ethereum based, but it can be, or blockchain based, but it can be. But what are you most looking forward to? I know it's kind of putting you on the spot. That's a big question. But if I had to say, you know, what's the first, I'm most excited about this?
So the thing I'm most excited about for the future is utilizing blockchain and other types of technologies like Tor that are censorship resistant. I really want this technology to go into like China and Iran and North Korea and get information flowing to there, because right now they're restricted. Right now they're censored, and they can't get a lot of the real story from around the world because they are selectively getting sent whatever their government wants them to get. And like being able to freely read information and form your own opinions is just so important that I want to see more applications, because like DeFi is all big right now, and I don't always get the hype. I'm kind of old school. Like I love oracles, and not a lot of people say they love oracles, and those kind of boring use cases. So pretty much something that can like go over, and Tor and I2P and Ethereum and others that are decentralized and not controlled by a single entity are going to be really powerful.
Great. I love that answer. I think information, you know, information and data might be one of the most valuable things, you know, that there is, you know, because it allows everybody to, you know, be part of all the cool things that are happening around the world. So that was an awesome answer. Uh, I guess Ethereum wise, what's the next thing you're seeing being developed or worked on that kind of excites you the most?
So the OVM and optimistic rollups, which they might be similar, the terminology is becoming more and more formed, but optimistic rollups are kind of a way to scale. It's like, you know how everyone was really excited about Plasma and it was making a lot of news? People have moved on from that scaling solution to optimistic rollups, which is like a zero knowledge solution. Speaking of zero knowledge like proofs and privacy on Ethereum and other like layer 2 solutions and chains is going to be super important. So there's the scaling side with optimistic rollups and OVM, and then there's the privacy side with zero knowledge proofs, ZK snarks, ZK starks, bulletproofs, where you can have tokens that you trade with other people, where I can give Rory like five tokens, and the blockchain shows that 5 tokens were transferred, but it doesn't show the sender or receiver. And it's this just crazy math behind the scenes that I will never understand, but it works, and people are using it today really expensively on Ethereum. But eventually that, along with mixers like Tornado Cash, are going to be big. Privacy as a layer on top of Ethereum is going to be huge.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. I've done a little bit of looking, and there's some research guys on the Chainlink side that discuss these things. And yeah, I can get lost in the math very quickly. I understand about the first 2 paragraphs, and then it gets into all kinds of cool math stuff. But I think I encourage everybody to check that stuff out. I think everyone's doing better about trying to explain it in a way where people can understand. And I'll put some links in there as well for people to check that out in the description. But that's the kind of stuff that excites me, is sometimes just taking the 10 minutes and just reading, if it's a white paper or some kind of technical specification, and then going back to someone who you trust and say, hey, this is what I understand. Is this really what it is? And then getting them to kind of guide you and saying, oh, okay, Merkle trees, that makes sense. I kind of get that now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. So we're done with kind of our initial Q&A section. We gathered some questions from the community that people were interested in asking. So we'll share those now with you, Hudson, and I'll do my best to give people the appropriate credit where I can. If you can answer them, great. If you can't, by all means, certainly let me know, and we can move on to the next one.
Sure.
So the first one is from Richard Masters. Hey, Hudson, a lot of people are saying that proof of stake defers a lot of control to exchanges and could possibly undermine decentralization. Do you see this as a problem? And if so, what can we do about it?
Yes, I see this as a potential problem for sure. I've talked to some exchanges that are saying we're definitely going to be in this space. We're already in this space with Tezos staking and stuff like that, and we want to be first in line for Ethereum staking, but we don't want to undermine the principles of decentralization. What do we do? And I don't have an answer for them. However, I direct them to researchers who might have a better answer. And off the top of my head, like, I think the one word solution to this is transparency. If we know what the exchanges are staking, how much, maybe custom identifiers of who is staking how much within their exchange. So maybe I'm ID 345R2 and I'm staking 600 ETH. My ID can be associated with that ETH that's being staked in Coinbase and transparently given out to the community, but my name is never attached to it publicly. So something like that, where as long as we know who the monopoly is and that they're acting in good faith, that's about as good as we are going to be able to do right now, in my mind, until the technology comes along enough that people can run this on their phones in the background or at home with a heavy uptime or with a lot of uptime. Or maybe we go to ETH 3.0, where we have something that can be used for everyone, even on like a little microchip that's on your arm, and you're walking around generating energy and it's doing proof of stake, like crazy stuff like that. Maybe that's the day when that'll happen. But I mean, if we're doing our best and getting close enough, it's never going to be perfect, but we just gotta, take the trade-offs as we do.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for that detailed answer. I love the I think the transparency approach is a great one. So if things start sliding in one direction, the community, you'd like to think as a whole, would say, okay, wait a second here. Let's take some of this, let's move it over here, and let's kind of re-decentralize the makeup. But like I said, I think information and allowing people to make decisions that benefit the network is probably as good as you can get, at least in the short term.
Yep.
Excellent. So this next one is from Dude. If you could go back and do anything differently since you've been involved in blockchain or crypto, what would it be and why?
If I could do anything over again,
Yes. Time machine.
That's a good question. I'm trying to think, because I'm not the kind of guy who holds like that many regrets, like against what I've done in the past. I just kind of learn from them for the most part. I would say I've had some regrets because like from DevCon 1 volunteering and then co-running DevCons 2, 3, and 4, and then helping a lot with DevCon 5. I've gained a lot of experience there, and I've also made a lot of mistakes. So if I could go back, for instance, to the DevCon 3 that was in Cancun, the meals were awful. If I would have known ahead of time how awful it was, like the same crappy sandwich and chips, like soggy sandwich, like every day. And so like little things like that, I can definitely say I regret. I regret not. Oh, here's a big regret. I regret not getting into not putting more Bitcoin into the pre-sale, because then I would be rich. A funny story is, though, I'm not going to say how much I put in, but I put in like a fraction of a Bitcoin in. But the thing was, I was meaning to put in like a fraction, and I doubled it accidentally. So I accidentally put 2 times more Bitcoin in the pre-sale than I wanted to. And I was like, oh no, I lost my Bitcoin. And then later it's like, 10x what it was at the time, because it was like 39 cents per Ether. And so I was like, well, that mistake helped me a lot.
Happy accidents, as I like to say.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, that's that's a good one. Okay, this is one from Eric, which I think is good. So we have a lot of obviously developers, but I think we have a lot of budding developers in our community that are excited by oracles. Then ultimately they realize, well, I got to write a smart contract, or I probably need to understand how to do this. Are there any learning tools or resources that you could name offhand? Hey, I want to learn Solidity. I am kind of day one that you could point people to.
There's something called Crypto Zombies. I forgot who runs it. I think it might be Loom
Yeah,
Network.
I think it's Loom. Yep.
Yeah, and that's a really cool way to just hit the ground running on contracts in an easy to use way. That's the main resource I point people to. The official Solidity documentation is good if you are a developer of any language before, because it'll tell you some of the differences between that. It's kind of JavaScript um, like yeah, and it's a mix of things. So yeah, I would say that's the only resource I can think of off the top of my head. Um, oh, I guess there are some courses you can take. I think Coursera has some. Consynsus has the Solidity Academy if they still have it going. And B9 Labs is another one I've heard really good things about. I've never done the B9 Labs one because I just learned Solidity on my own, but I've heard it's good.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you for that. We'll point people to those resources in the description if you're interested in those as well. And then here we go, kind of like the last community question that we have. What effect do you think the upgrade to E2 will have on the burgeoning DeFi ecosystem? So I guess, obviously DeFi you mentioned is kind of a hot thing. And I think people are, wondering, well, is there some kind of impact on some of maybe the current dApps or kind of important dApps that people are using today?
For me and my knowledge of ETH 2.0, it's too early to know exactly the impact. I will say on the positive side, the good impact is going to be scalability. So you're going to be able to have more people on your DeFi platform without just bogging down the network and making the fees exorbitant. However, on the flip side, we haven't fully figured out like how to well, until sharding comes, like how are we going to control state growth, for instance? That's like a big problem. And if things get popular, like we have another crypto kitties, then it's going to get real difficult real fast to keep up with syncing the network and having enough nodes for it to be decentralized and stuff like that.
Yeah, definitely. It's making sure you're not a victim of your own success, essentially, in a way.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
Perfect. All right. Well, just the last thing is I want to give you, are there any questions that you have for me or anything that you would like to ask? I've asked you 20, so I think it's only fair. If you have anything, feel free to ask me. And if not, that's okay as well.
So I'm curious about a couple things. I want to say first though, Chainlink community is awesome. Their memes make me laugh a lot on
Yeah.
Twitter.
Yeah.
So that's really a good time. And beyond that, what's the next big thing for Chainlink, especially because you're now getting integrated into all these DeFi projects and there's a lot of challenges there. What are some of the next big things?
Yeah, I think, and obviously I'm on the very superficial when it comes to development, but I think there's a lot of there's actually multiple things that are being worked on in terms of scaling. You kind of mentioned some of those things where the team's exploring what are solutions where you can basically cryptographically prove answers from oracles are correct or be able to see what they are, but combine all those into a single transaction. So something like threshold signatures, I know a lot of work's being done there. And then things like Mixicles, which is another interesting approach of basically saying like, okay, well, there's likely at some point going to be banking or other entities that are going to be involved here where privacy, there's going to be a certain level of privacy with transactions or things like that that they need, and figuring out how to incorporate that kind of into the Chainlink network. And then the last kind of thing, which is a lot of people see the use cases of, but there's a lot of research to be done, is kind of trusted execution environments. And just like everything else, there's pros and cons to that. People love the speed and some of the privacy and security that it can offer, but at the same time, it's nascent technology, which is a lot of times what we're dealing with. And the truth is, it's one thing to say, yes, this works and it's great, but it's quite another thing to really sit there and audit everything and take a hard look and say, okay, it's great with transactions of these size, but if we're talking bonds, which are trillions of dollars, the reality is you have to take a hard look at the technology and say, is everybody comfortable using this technology and putting trillions of dollars in a contract or multiple contracts? Obviously, there's a lot of things that you have to take into account when you're doing that. And so I know the team is actively exploring on a research and development basis of, A, how can we make it easier for node operators and users of our system, working on price deviation. So that's like a big one. And so the thing is, it's basically saying, you know, when the price of an asset moves, how quickly does an oracle need to respond to that movement? That's kind of an ongoing conversation between kind of everybody on the network. You know, what is the threshold? And then everyone has their own threshold. Someone may say I need it every 1%. Someone may say I need it 0.5%. Someone may say, oh, I need it even more often. Well, just as you mentioned, you have to take the network into account. And so if you have crazy fluctuations, what does that mean to the network? Things like that. So I think it's really taking some of the steps back and saying, we're at a great place now. There's a lot of things we want to add, and really focusing in on things like threshold signatures where we get that kind of speed without clogging the network down.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's really good that y'all are looking into that and kind of being in the forefront of it, because a lot of dApps don't focus on that. They just focus on getting things out the door. So yeah, having that scalability and care about the network is good.
Right. And the approach that works for us may or may not work for others, but what I think is a perfect thing about Ethereum is that in a perfect world you have 20 possible solutions, and then you get to say this is the best solution for me right now and choose that, and the next project may say, oh, but this one over here is the best solution. And so creating all this open source, allowing people to really deep dive into it and figuring out, you know, what's the best solution for scalability for my particular, it may be threshold signatures, it may be optimistic rollups, it may be, you know, things like that, and figuring out what works best for them.
Absolutely.
Cool. Well, I want to say thank you so much for taking the time. As I say, I know you're busy. Always appreciate the work that you do for Ethereum. And as I said, it's definitely been a guiding light for me. And I look forward to kind of seeing you. And again, those that don't know, Hudson, fantastic guy. If you ever see him at a conference or a meetup or whatever, extremely approachable. I've always really respected him in regards to that. Always willing to kind of stop by and talk to anybody about anything. So definitely stop by next time if you say hello. If people want to find out more information about what's being developed or more information about Ethereum, is there a best place for them to go, or is there a couple places you would recommend?
So there are a couple. So Week in Ethereum is a newsletter that Evan Van Ness runs, and every week he puts down like the top things that happened in Ethereum. It's really interesting. It covers a lot of different areas, from really deep level to higher level that you can just like, you know, like the average non-technical person could understand. Also, my DMs are open on Twitter. Don't bombard me with spam. But if you have questions about how to get involved, I'm always happy to take those and get answers for you about where you fit in best if you just describe your skill set.
Awesome. Yeah, that's perfect. And I'm always happy to do the same. So if anybody would like to know how to get involved, I always say be willing to volunteer, be willing to create content. And if you think something's needed out there and you create it, my guess is there's other people that are going to watch or use that content just like you would.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Well, I just want to say thank you again to Hudson Jameson for joining us. Thank you, everybody watching the stream. Again, it'll take us a couple hours. We'll kind of edit out that waiting room portion, kind of start it right at the beginning of the AMA. And again, it was a pleasure. Thank you again for all the work you do, and look forward to the next time.
You too, Rory. Thanks.
Thank you, Hudson. Have a good one.
You too.
Bye-bye.